The muted sobs around me blurred into a dull hum. Victoria leaned in, her breath hot against my ear, whispering, "This changes nothing between us, Irene. You still don't belong here, and after today, you never will again." I froze, the small silver tray of pastries I was holding trembling in my hands. Had I heard her correctly, my brother, David, had only been gone a week. The raw grief still clawed at my throat. And now this, Victoria, please, I whispered back, my voice tight. Not now. The memorial service was winding down, guests murmuring condolences to David's widow, their faces etched with polite sympathy. Eleanor and Julian, my daughter, and her fiancé, hovered nearby, their expressions mirroring my own confusion. "Mom, are you all right?" Eleanor asked, her hand resting lightly on my arm. I managed a weak smile, just a bit overwhelmed. "Dear, it's all a lot." Victoria straightened, her expression carefully neutral, though a glint of something cold flickered in her eyes. "Of course, Irene, grief can be so debilitating." Her voice dripped with false concern, each word a carefully placed barb. "Perhaps you should go home and rest." I wanted to scream, to lash out at her cruelty, but I held back. This wasn't the time or the place. Besides, a small, dangerous part of me recognized the steel in her gaze. She meant every word. "Perhaps you're right," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "I'll just say goodbye to a few people." I turned away, my heart pounding, and offered a strained smile to David's old business partner, Mr. Harrison, who was approaching with his wife. "Such a tragic loss," Mrs. Harrison murmured, her eyes filled with genuine sadness. "David was such a kind man." "He was," I agreed, my voice catching. "He really was." The small talk felt hollow, each word a painful reminder of what I had lost. David, my brother, my confidant, my only family. And now Victoria, his wife, was trying to erase me too. As the last of the guests filtered out, Eleanor and Julian came to my side again. "Are you sure you're okay, Mom?" Eleanor asked, her brow furrowed with worry. Victoria seemed off. "She's grieving too," I said, trying to downplay the incident. "It's a difficult time for everyone." I didn't want to burden them with Victoria's hostility just yet. I needed time to process it myself, to understand what had just happened. As we walked towards the car, I glanced back at the house, the large Victorian where David and I had grown up, where I had lived for the past few years since our parents passed. A wave of nausea washed over me. Victoria's words echoed in my ears. "You don't belong here." Could she possibly mean? The drive home was tense. Julian kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet concern. Eleanor held my hand, her thumb rubbing soothing circles against my skin. Neither of them pressed me, and I was grateful. I needed time to gather my thoughts, to understand the undercurrent of malice in Victoria's words. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, I knew something was wrong. A large moving truck was parked in front of the house, men in uniform busily carrying boxes and furniture out onto the lawn. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My heart began to pound in my chest. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Victoria stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the movers with a satisfied smirk. She saw me and descended the steps, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Irene," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "I'm so glad you're back. I was just about to send someone to look for you." What is all this?" I stammered, gesturing at the chaos unfolding around me. My belongings, my life, scattered across the lawn like discarded trash. "Well," Victoria said, her smile widening, "as I told you earlier, things have changed. This house now belongs to me, and I'm afraid you no longer have a place here." "But David and I own this house together," I protested, my voice rising in panic. "This is my home." "Was your home," Victoria corrected, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "David left everything to me, Irene. The house, the car, the bank accounts, everything." She held up a thick envelope. "I have the paperwork right here, signed, sealed, and delivered." My mind reeled. This couldn't be true. David wouldn't do this. He knew how much this house meant to me. Something felt terribly wrong. I looked from Victoria's smug face to the movers hauling my furniture onto the truck, and a wave of cold resolve washed over me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I wouldn't let her get away with this. I would find out the truth, even if it was the last thing I did. "I see," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Well, Victoria, I hope you enjoy your ill-gotten gains." I turned to Eleanor and Julian, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "Let's go. We'll find somewhere else to stay." As we drove away, I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror, a lump forming in my throat. But beneath the grief and the shock, a flicker of something else began to ignite. A spark of defiance, a thirst for justice. I would get my revenge, Victoria. Just you wait. Rain lashed against the hospital windows, blurring the city lights into a hazy, shimmering mess. The doctor's words echoed in my ears, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile wall of my composure. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Davies. There was nothing more we could do. My brother gone." Just like that, I clutched the thin hospital blanket around me, the chill seeping deep into my bones. He didn't say anything. Before I stammered, my voice a choked whisper. The doctor's gaze was kind, but firm. He was unconscious on arrival. "Mrs. Davies." The impact he trailed off in unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. My head swam. Robert. My vibrant, larger-than-life brother, reduced to a cold, clinical pronouncement. I need a moment," I managed, waving a shaky hand. The doctor nodded and quietly left the room. I sank onto the hard plastic chair, the sterile smell of the hospital suddenly suffocating. The world narrowed to the rhythmic beep of a nearby monitor, a relentless pulse marking the passage of time in a world that suddenly felt utterly empty. Robert. We had shared so much, so many years, so many whispered secrets and boisterous laughs. Now, only silence. The image of his infectious grin flashed behind my eyelids, followed by the horrifying memory of the mangled car the police officer had shown me just hours ago. A sob tore through me, raw and uncontrolled. How could this be happening? He was supposed to be best man at Eleanor's wedding next spring. He was supposed to walk her down the aisle. Not this. The wedding. Eleanor, Julian, my daughter. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with grief. I needed to tell her. She needed to know. I dialed Eleanor's number. the familiar ringtone a small, fragile thread of connection in this unraveling world. "Mom," she answered, her voice laced with a sleepy lilt. "Eleanor," I began, but the words caught in my throat. A wave of nausea swept over me, the stark reality of my loss crashing down with renewed force. "Eleanor, darling, there's been an accident." The words tumbled out, clumsy and inadequate. Silence. Then, a sharp intake of breaths. "Mom, what kind of accident? Is Dad okay?" The question was a small, sharp stab of guilt. Robert had been more of a father to Eleanor than her own ever was. He had stepped in, filled the void, been the constant, unwavering presence in her life. "Eleanor," I choked out, the words heavy with unshed tears. It's Robert. He's gone." The silence on the other end stretched, an agonizing chasm of disbelief. Then Eleanor's voice, thin and brittle, barely a whisper. "No, Mom, no. Tell me you're wrong." I couldn't. I wished I could. But the truth was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. "Oh, Eleanor," I sobbed, unable to hold back the tears any longer. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. He's gone." There was a muffled sob from the other end of the line, then Julian's voice, low and concerned. "Eleanor, what's wrong? What happened?" I heard Eleanor's choked reply, the words blurring into indistinguishable sounds. "Mom, hospital, Robert," then. Julian's voice, clearer this time, speaking to me. "Mrs. Davies, we'll be right there." The following hours were a blur of tearful embraces, hushed condolences, and the agonizing paperwork of death. Victoria, Robert's wife, arrived, her face pale and drawn. We clung to each other, two women adrift in a sea of grief. But even in the midst of our shared sorrow, a subtle shift began to occur, a coldness creeping into Victoria's eyes. I pushed it aside, attributing it to shock, to the overwhelming nature of our shared loss. We made arrangements for the funeral, discussed Robert's wishes, shared memories, and cried until our eyes were swollen and raw. Then, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple, Victoria turned to me, her voice devoid of the warmth it had held just hours before. "Irene," she said, her voice clipped, "I need to talk to you about the house." My heart sank. Robert and I had bought the house together, a testament to our lifelong bond. We had poured our hearts and souls into renovating it, transforming it from a dilapidated Victorian into a warm, inviting home. It was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a repository of shared memories, a sanctuary built on love and laughter. "The house?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What about it?" Victoria's gaze hardened. "Well, it's in Robert's name, of course. And now, well, now it's mine." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. "Yours," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "But we bought it together." Victoria's lips tightened into a thin line. "You contributed?" "Yes, but legally, it's Robert's. And now it's mine. I need you to move out." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Move out, from the house Robert and I had built together, from the home that held every precious memory of our shared lives. "Victoria," I pleaded, my voice cracking, "please, don't do this. Not now." But Victoria's face remained impassive. "I'm sorry, Irene," she said, her voice cold and distant. "But I need the space. I need to move on, and I can't do that with you here. The casual cruelty of her words sliced through me deeper than any grief. Move on, she was talking about moving on. Just hours after her husband, my brother, had been taken from us. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the world tilting precariously on its axis. I stumbled back, grasping the edge of a nearby table for support. When do I need to be out? I asked, the words barely audible. Victoria glanced at her watch, a gesture that seemed both callous and calculated. I'll give you a week, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. A week to pack your things and find somewhere else to go. A week. 7 days to dismantle my life, to erase the last vestiges of my connection to Robert, to sever the ties to the home we had built together. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, a sound born of grief and disbelief. A week, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Victoria nodded, her eyes cold and unyielding. A week, she confirmed. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the sterile silence of the hospital corridor, the weight of my loss pressing down on me, heavier than ever before. The rain continued to lash against the windows, a relentless reminder of the storm raging both outside and within. A week. I had a week to figure out what to do, where to go. But more than that, I had a week to understand the chilling change in Victoria, a change that hinted at something far deeper, far more sinister than simple grief. And a small, flickering ember of resolve began to ignite within me, a promise to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Rain lashed against the car windows, blurring the already bleak landscape into streaks of gray. You need to be out by the end of the week, Victoria said, her voice flat, devoid of any trace of the grief I felt churning inside. I stared at her, the words echoing in the suffocating silence of the car. Out, I managed, my voice a choked whisper. We were on our way back from burying my brother, her husband, and the only family I had left. The rain seemed to mirror the storm raging within me. Yes, out, Victoria repeated, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. This house is mine now, and frankly, Irene, I don't want you here. Eleanor, my daughter, squeezed my hand from the back seat. I could feel the tension radiating from her, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Julian, her fiancé, sat beside her, his face a mask of discomfort. I knew they both witnessed the subtle digs, the veiled insults Victoria had been aiming at me ever since my brother's sudden passing. But this was a blatant declaration of war. But where will I go, I asked, the question hanging heavy in the humid air of the car. It wasn't just about the house. This was the home I had shared with my brother for years, the place filled with memories, both happy and bittersweet. It was my anchor, my sanctuary, and now she was ripping it away from me, just days after his death. That's not my problem, Irene, Victoria snapped, her voice laced with ice. You're a grown woman. Figure it out. She adjusted the rearview mirror, her eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment. There was a glint of something cold and hard in their depths, something that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just grief I saw in her eyes. It was triumph. The rest of the drive was a blur of muted sounds and stifled emotions. The rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers seemed to mock my despair, each swipe a reminder of the life that was being erased before my eyes. I looked at Eleanor, her face etched with worry. I forced a weak smile, trying to reassure her, even though I felt anything but reassured myself. "It'll be all right, sweetheart," I murmured, squeezing her hand. "We'll figure something out." But deep down, a cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I had nowhere to go, no savings, no other family. My brother had always taken care of me, and now he was gone. Victoria, his wife, the woman who had promised to look after me, was casting me out into the storm, leaving me to fend for myself. As we pulled into the driveway of the house, the rain finally began to ease. I stepped out of the car, the damp air clinging to me like a shroud. The house loomed over me, no longer a sanctuary, but a symbol of my loss and vulnerability. Victoria brushed past me, her keys jangling in her hand. "I expect you to be gone by Friday," she said over her shoulder, not even bothering to look at me. I watched her disappear inside, the heavy oak door closing behind her with a final, resounding thud. I stood there for a moment, the rain dripping from my hair, the chill seeping into my bones. The world around me seemed to tilt on its axis, everything I had known and loved slipping away like sand through my fingers. Eleanor and Julian joined me, their faces mirroring my own despair. "Mom," Eleanor started, her voice trembling. "What are we going to do?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather my scattered thoughts. I had to be strong for Eleanor, for myself. "We'll find a way," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "We always do." But as I looked up at the house, at the darkened windows that once held warmth and laughter, I knew this wasn't just about finding a place to stay. This was about something more. This was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, about fighting for my brother's memory, about exposing the truth that Victoria was so desperately trying to hide. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of sunlight peeked through the clouds. It was a small, fleeting ray of hope in the darkness that had enveloped me, and in that moment, something shifted within me. The grief and despair didn't disappear, but they were tempered by a new emotion. Resolve. I wouldn't let Victoria win. I wouldn't let her erase my brother's legacy. I would fight back. I had to. For him. For Eleanor. For myself. As I walked towards the house, I noticed a small, worn leather-bound book lying on the porch steps. It was my brother's journal, the one he always kept close. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the familiar inscription on the cover. A strange feeling washed over me, a mixture of sadness and anticipation. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the key to unlocking the truth, the key to reclaiming my life, the key to getting my revenge. The game, Victoria, had just begun. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm inside me. "I want you out by the end of the week," Victoria said, her voice flat, emotionless. I stared at her, my breath catching in my throat. Just hours after burying my brother, after the hollow words of comfort, the shared grief, this, out, I finally managed to whisper, the word a fragile thing in the cavernous silence of our shared home. "Yes, out," Victoria repeated, folding her arms. "This is my house now." The legal papers were already spread out on the dining table, the stark black ink a cruel contrast to the polished mahogany. It was the same table where we had celebrated birthdays, holidays, milestones, our laughter echoing in this very room. Now it felt cold, sterile, a battlefield where I was clearly losing. But where will I go? I asked, my voice trembling. The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered. Victoria simply shrugged, her eyes flitting away from mine, as if the answer were obvious, as if I were some inconvenient piece of furniture she was eager to discard. That's your problem, Irene, she said, her voice laced with a chilling indifference. This is my house now, and I intend to sell it. Sell it. The house that held so many memories. The house my brother had poured his heart and soul into. The house we had inherited together. The thought was a physical blow. I stumbled back, clutching the back of a chair for support. The room spun. Sell it, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. But this was our home. Victoria didn't even bother to look up. She was busy gathering the papers, her movements brisk and efficient, as though she couldn't wait to be rid of me, rid of the last vestige of her late husband's family. It is my home, she corrected, her voice sharp, and it will be someone else's soon. I wanted to scream, to rage, to tear those papers from her hands, but I couldn't. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, leaving me feeling drained, hollowed out. Grief and betrayal were a toxic cocktail, and I was drowning in it. Fine, I said, the word a bitter taste on my tongue. I'll leave. There was no point arguing, no point pleading. Victoria had made up her mind. She had always resented me. I realized now, always seen me as an intruder in her perfect little world. And now, with my brother gone, there was nothing to hold her back. She wanted me gone, and she would get her way. I walked out of the dining room, my legs feeling heavy, my heart leaden in my chest. I climbed the stairs to my room, the familiar creaks of the house suddenly sounding alien, ominous. My room, which had always been my sanctuary, now felt like a prison cell. I packed a small bag, just the essentials. There was no point in taking anything else. Where would I go? I had no family left, no close friends, no place to call home. As I packed, I caught sight of a framed photograph on my nightstand. It was a picture of my brother, his arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing. Tears blurred my vision. I picked up the frame, clutching it to my chest. "Oh, Daniel," I whispered, my voice breaking. "What am I going to do?" The silence of the room was my only answer. I placed the photograph carefully in my bag, a small piece of the past to carry with me into the uncertain future. The next few days were a blur of packing, moving, and trying to find a place to stay. I ended up in a small, dingy motel room, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and despair. The contrast between the grand house I had shared with my brother and this cramped, depressing space was stark, a constant reminder of everything I had lost. I felt adrift, unmoored, like a ship lost at sea. The days bled into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. I barely ate, barely slept, consumed by grief and a growing sense of injustice. How could Victoria do this to me? How could she be so callous, so cruel? One evening, as I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring blankly at the flickering television screen, a strange calm settled over me. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it no longer consumed me. It had been replaced by something else, something cold and hard, something that felt like resolve. I wouldn't let Victoria win. I wouldn't let her erase my brother's memory, erase me. I would fight back. I didn't know how yet, but I would find a way. I would find a way to reclaim what was rightfully mine, to expose Victoria's true nature, and to honor my brother's memory. I started by going through the few belongings I had managed to salvage. Among them was a small box of old family documents, things my brother had kept for sentimental reasons. As I sifted through the papers, something caught my eye. It was a document related to the house, a document I had never seen before. I read it carefully, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I read it again. A slow smile spread across my face. It seemed Victoria wasn't as clever as she thought she was. She had made a mistake, a crucial mistake, and I was going to use it against her. The game, Victoria, had just begun. I could almost hear my brother whispering in my ear, a hint of pride in his voice. I knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would not only survive this, I would thrive. Rain lashed against the windows of my temporary apartment, mirroring the storm inside me. I stared at the document Victoria had thrust at me, ink blurring through my tears. This, she had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, is the transfer of ownership. Marcus signed over his share of the house to me months before he passed. I traced the signature with a trembling finger. It looked like Marcus's, but there was something off. I'd spent years watching him sign checks, letters, birthday cards. This wasn't right. The flourish at the end of his name was too sharp, then too narrow. Something in my gut screamed foul play. But why would he do that? I had asked, my voice barely a whisper. Victoria's smile hadn't reached her eyes. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of. Irene. He knew you weren't stable. That was her favorite word these past few weeks. Ever since Marcus's accident, she'd used it like a weapon, chipping away at my confidence, making me question my own sanity. The rain outside intensified, matching the pounding in my head. I pulled out the box of Marcus's belongings I had managed to salvage. Photographs, letters, trinkets, fragments of a life cut short. I sifted through them mechanically, my mind numb with grief and a growing sense of unease. Then my fingers brushed against something hard, a small, leather-bound notebook. Marcus's journal. I hadn't seen it in years. He'd kept it meticulously, filling page after page with his thoughts and dreams. With trembling hands, I opened it. The familiar script filled the pages, a comforting presence in the midst of the chaos. I flipped through, scanning entries about his work, his travels, his hopes for the future. Then I stopped. An entry dated 6 months ago, just a few weeks before his accident. Met with Eleanor and Julian today, it read. They have some exciting news. A wedding is in the works, and they're looking to buy a place near the coast. Told them I'd help with the down payment. They're such a lovely couple, so happy for my girl. A wave of warmth washed over me. My Eleanor, always chasing her dreams. But something about the entry niggled at me. A down payment. Marcus had been struggling financially. He'd confided in me about some investments that had gone sour. He wouldn't have had the money to help Eleanor with a down payment. not without selling something valuable. My heart pounded in my chest. I flipped back a few pages. Another entry, a month earlier. Victoria suggested transferring my share of the house to her. It read, says it would simplify things in the long run. Not sure. Feels wrong. Need to think about it. The words jumped off the page. He hadn't wanted to do it. He'd felt pressured. By Victoria. A cold fury began to build inside me. She had manipulated him, taken advantage of his kindness, his trust. And then, after he was gone, she'd used that same manipulation to push me out, to steal what was rightfully mine. I reread the entry, poring over every word. Simplify things. He'd written, simplify things for whom? Certainly not for him. He loved that house. It was filled with memories, with the echoes of our shared childhood. He wouldn't have given it up willingly, not unless he'd been tricked. Suddenly, the discrepancies in the signature on the transfer document made sense. It wasn't just slightly off. It was a forgery. Victoria had forged Marcus's signature. I closed the journal, my hand trembling. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. Victoria's sudden concern for his well-being, her insistence on managing his finances, her constant undermining of my relationship with him. It had all been a calculated plan, a carefully orchestrated scheme to isolate him, control him, and ultimately steal his half of the house. And once he was gone, she'd use that same cunning to try and dispose of me. The rain had stopped. A sliver of moonlight peeked through the clouds, illuminating the room. I took a deep breath, a strange calm settling over me. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a new emotion. Resolve. Victoria thought she had won. She thought she could just waltz in and take everything, leaving me with nothing. She was wrong. I had something she didn't. The truth. And I was going to use it. I carefully placed Marcus's journal back in the box, a small smile playing on my lips. The game, Victoria, had just begun. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. Hello, David. It's Irene. I think I've found something you'll be very interested in. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the dusty attic window, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. I carefully unfolded the brittle parchment, my fingers trembling slightly. This document, Victoria had claimed, proved her sole ownership of the house my brother David and I had inherited from our parents. It's all perfectly legal, Irene, she'd said, her voice dripping with false sympathy just days after David's funeral. You understand, don't you? This is my home now. I hadn't understood. I'd been too numb with grief to fight, too trusting to question. But something had always felt wrong, a nagging unease that wouldn't let me rest. And that unease had led me here, to the attic, to the dusty box of family papers searching for answers. The document purported to be an amendment to our parents' will granting David's share of the house solely to Victoria upon his death. It was dated just a few months before David's sudden illness. My heart pounded as I ran my fingers over the faded script. Something wasn't right. I knew my father's handwriting intimately. This wasn't it. The flourishes were too exaggerated, the slant too steep. It was a good forgery, I had to admit, but a forgery nonetheless. I retrieved a magnifying glass from my desk downstairs, my mind buzzing with a strange mixture of anger and a cold, hard resolve. Back in the attic, I examined the signature under the magnified lens. There, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, was a slight tremor in the final stroke of my father's name. David had told me about it, how our father's hand had started shaking in his final years. He'd even joked about it, saying his signature looked like a seismograph reading. This forged signature, however, was smooth, confident, devoid of any tremor. The forger had missed a crucial detail. Clever, Victoria, but not clever enough, I whispered to the empty attic. My grief, for a moment, receded, replaced by a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. This document, this fraudulent piece of paper, was my key to exposing Victoria's deceit and reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I spent the next few hours meticulously comparing the forged document with genuine examples of my father's handwriting from old letters and legal papers I found in the attic. The discrepancies became more and more glaring. The spacing between letters, the formation of certain loops and curves, the subtle pressure variations, everything pointed to a forgery. I made photocopies of the forged document and the genuine samples, carefully highlighting the differences with a red pen. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. I had concrete proof. I thought of Eleanor, my daughter. I need to do this for her too, I murmured. Victoria had made it clear she saw Eleanor as nothing more than an obstacle, an unwelcome reminder of David. She'd even suggested, not so subtly, that Eleanor should move out, find her own place. The thought of my daughter being pushed out of the only home she'd ever known, the home her grandfather had built, fueled my determination. Downstairs, the phone rang, shattering the quiet of the house. It was Eleanor. "Mom, are you okay? Julian and I were just talking about you. We're worried." Her voice was filled with concern. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I replied, trying to keep my voice even, just sorting through some old papers. "It's a bit overwhelming. Do you want us to come over?" she offered. "Julian's making his famous lasagna. We could bring some over." The thought of seeing Eleanor, of having her and Julian's support, warmed me. But I knew I needed to handle this on my own, at least for now. "That's sweet of you, honey, but I'm okay. Just a little tired. We'll have dinner together soon, I promise." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea. The forged document and my evidence spread out before me. I considered my options. Confronting Victoria directly would likely be unproductive. She'd deny everything, and I'd be back where I started. I needed a more strategic approach, something that would expose her lies publicly and leave her with no room to maneuver. A thought began to form, a seed of a plan taking root in my mind. Victoria was hosting a large charity gala next month, a lavish affair she'd been planning for weeks. She'd been bragging about it incessantly, eager to show off her newfound wealth and social standing. It was the perfect opportunity. A public setting, a large audience. The stage was set for a dramatic reveal. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with cold, hard resolve. Victoria wanted a show. I would give her a show she'd never forget. I picked up my phone and started making calls. First, to a reputable lawyer specializing in estate litigation, then to a trusted friend who worked in public relations. The wheels were in motion. The game was on. The gala was weeks away, and with each passing day, the anticipation, the quiet thrill of my plan coming together, grew stronger. Victoria thought she had won. She thought she had banished me, erased me from the picture. She had no idea what was coming. The stale air of the legal office felt heavy, almost suffocating. I smoothed down my skirt, my hand trembling slightly as I clutched the folder containing the evidence. It had been weeks of careful planning, of late nights poring over documents, of whispered consultations with my lawyer. "Are you ready, Mrs. Peterson?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice calm and reassuring. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Then let's proceed." He led me into a small conference room where Victoria sat, ramrod straight, her face a mask of composure. Eleanor and Julian flanked her, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and defiance. Seeing them there beside her stung more than I expected. "Irene," Victoria said, her voice laced with false sweetness. "What a surprise! To what do we owe the pleasure? Cut the pleasantries, Victoria," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. "We both know why we're here." I slid the folder across the table, the crisp sound of paper against polished wood echoing in the tense silence. Victoria opened it slowly, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and shaken. Where did you get this?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "That's not important," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. "What is important is that this proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that the document you used to claim ownership of the house is a forgery." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Julian looked from Victoria to me, his expression unreadable. You're lying," Victoria sputtered, her composure finally cracking. "This is some kind of trick, is it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I have expert analysis confirming the forgery, and I have witnesses who can testify that your claims about my brother's wishes were fabricated. You see, Victoria, I've been busy." I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "You thought you could just push me aside, erase me from the picture. You thought you could take everything that rightfully belonged to my brother and me. You were wrong." Victoria's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, her face a mixture of anger and fear. I don't know what you're talking about," she finally managed, her voice weak and unconvincing. "Don't you?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's refresh your memory, shall we?" I pulled out another document, a copy of my brother's will, the real one, the one he drafted years ago, before his sudden illness. "This," I said, holding it up, "is my brother's true last will and testament, the one where he clearly states that the house, his business, everything, is to be divided equally between us. Not a word about you, Victoria, not a single mention." The silence in the room was deafening. Eleanor's eyes were wide with shock. Julian's jaw clenched tight. Victoria stared at the document, her face ashen. He changed his mind," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He told me he wanted me to have everything." "Really?" I said, my voice laced with disbelief. And I suppose he also told you to forge his signature, to fabricate a whole new will just to suit your greedy desires. I shook my head slowly. You underestimated me, Victoria. You thought I was weak, that I would just roll over and let you walk all over me. You were wrong. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. Mrs. Peterson, he said, his voice calm and professional. Perhaps we should allow Miss Carter and her legal counsel some time to review this new information. I nodded, satisfied. The look on Victoria's face was worth more than any monetary settlement. The fear in her eyes, the realization that her carefully constructed lies were crumbling around her, that was my victory. Of course, I said, rising to my feet. I'm sure Miss Carter will want to discuss her options with her lawyer. Perhaps she'll even want to consider a settlement. Before this goes any further, I paused, letting the words hang in the air. After all, I added, my voice soft, I'm feeling quite generous today. I might be willing to let her keep something, a small token, perhaps, of our family connection. I glanced at Eleanor and Julian, their faces pale and strained. Then I turned and walked out of the room, leaving Victoria to stew in her own deception. The fight wasn't over, not yet, but I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I was winning. The house, my brother's legacy, would soon be mine again, and that, I thought, was only the beginning. The late afternoon sun streamed through the living room window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I sat on the worn armchair, the same one I'd sunk into countless times with my brother Mark. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be back here after Victoria, his wife, had so viciously evicted me just weeks after his funeral. You have no claim to this house, Irene, she'd hissed, her eyes cold. It's mine now. But things weren't quite so simple. I smoothed out the document on my lap, the one that had been tucked away so carefully in Mark's study, the one that proved the house was rightfully mine. My phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. "Mom, are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. "Absolutely," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. It's time Victoria faced the truth. A car pulled up outside. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The front door opened, and Victoria swept in, Julian trailing behind her. "What are you doing here?" Victoria demanded, her face a mask of disbelief. "I could ask you the same question," I countered, rising to my feet. The weight of the document in my hand felt reassuring. "This house," I said, holding up the paper, "belongs to me." Victoria scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. That's a forgery." "Really?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because I had it verified by 3 independent experts. It's Mark's will, the real one, leaving everything to me." Julian stepped forward, his face pale. "Victoria, is this true?" he asked, his voice strained. Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "It's nonsense, Julian. Don't listen to her." But the uncertainty in her eyes betrayed her. I pressed on. "This will states clearly that Mark left the house and all his assets to me, his sister. He knew I would cherish this place. Unlike you." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You forged another will, didn't you, Victoria? You thought you could just push me out, steal what was rightfully mine." Victoria's face contorted with rage. "You have no proof," she shrieked. "Oh, I have plenty of proof," I said calmly. I held up a second document, a copy of the forged will. "This is the one you submitted to probate. Notice anything different?" I pointed to a subtle discrepancy in the signatures, a slight tremor in them absent in Mark's true signature. "He developed it after his stroke last year, something you conveniently forgot." The blood drained from Victoria's face. Julian looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and disgust. "You lied to me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can explain," Victoria stammered, but the words died in her throat. "I don't think you can," Julian said, his voice cold. He turned to me. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice regaining some of its composure. "I apologize for my part in this. I was misled." He hesitated, then added, Perhaps, Eleanor, and I could help you settle back in." I looked at him, then at Eleanor, who stood beside him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "That's very kind of you, Julian," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "But I think I can manage." Victoria, defeated and humiliated, stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the silent rooms. The house was mine again. It was finally over. But as I looked around at the familiar furniture, at the photographs of Mark smiling from the mantelpiece, a wave of sadness washed over me. This victory felt hollow, tainted by the betrayal and the loss. I had won. But at what cost? The house was filled with memories, bittersweet reminders of a happier time, a time before the lies and the deceit had torn our family apart. I walked over to the window, watching as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn. Eleanor came and stood beside me, slipping her arm round my waist. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered. "We'll get through this together." I squeezed her hand, grateful for her presence, for the unwavering support she had shown me throughout this ordeal. The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a steady rhythm that marked the passage of time. A time that I hoped would eventually heal the wounds that had been inflicted. I looked at Eleanor, her face etched with concern. "There's something else, Mom," she began hesitantly. About Julian my heart sank. Had the ordeal not truly ended after all? Was there another layer of deception waiting to be uncovered? The setting sun seemed to cast a long shadow over not just the lawn, but over my future too. The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Victoria sat across from me, a smug smile playing on her lips. She clearly thought she had this won. "Don't expect any sympathy, Irene," she'd hissed earlier, adjusting her pristine pearl necklace. "This house is mine now." But I held something she didn't. The truth. The judge addressed us, his voice echoing in the hushed room. "Ms. Irene, you claim that the document transferring ownership of the property to Ms. Victoria is forged. Do you have evidence?" I took a deep breath, my hand tightening around the small, worn leather-bound book in my lap. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I do." I presented the book, explaining it was my brother's personal journal, entrusted to me years ago. Inside, tucked between pages filled with his familiar handwriting, was a loose sheet of paper, a draft of the very document Victoria claimed was legitimate. My brother often sketched and drafted documents in this journal, I explained, pointing to the near-identical wording, but with key differences. The dates, the signatures, even the font's subtle variations reveal the final version presented by Ms. Victoria is a forgery. Julian, Eleanor's fiancé, who'd surprisingly offered his legal expertise, stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said, "we've had a handwriting expert analyze both documents. Their findings corroborate Ms. Irene's claims. The signature on the presented transfer document is not a match to Mr. David's known signature." Victoria's face paled. She sputtered, "This is ridiculous. This journal, it's irrelevant." The judge, however, remained impassive. "Ms. Victoria," he said, his voice sharp, "do you have any evidence to refute these claims?" She fumbled with her handbag, pulling out a stack of papers, but her hands trembled. I have the signed and notarized document. That's all the proof I need." Julian countered smoothly, "Your Honor, the notary on this document has recently been investigated for fraudulent practices. Their stamp is no longer considered valid." I watched as Victoria's carefully constructed composure crumbled. The smug smile was gone, replaced by a look of panic. She glanced at her lawyer, who whispered something in her ear, but it was too late. The judge banged his gavel. "The court finds in favor of Miss Irene," he declared. "Ownership of the property is rightfully hers." A wave of relief washed over me. It was finally over. The house, my brother's legacy, was safe. Eleanor, who had been sitting beside me throughout the proceedings, squeezed my hand. "I knew you could do it, Mom," she whispered, her eyes shining with pride. I managed a small smile. It hadn't just been about the house. It had been about justice, about honoring my brother's memory, about standing up to Victoria's cruelty. As we left the courtroom, I caught Victoria's eye. The anger and disbelief were palpable. "This isn't over, Irene," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. I simply met her gaze, a newfound strength coursing through me. "Actually, Victoria," I said calmly, "it is." I turned and walked away, Eleanor by my side, leaving Victoria standing there, defeated and alone. The weight of grief still lingered, but a new feeling was emerging, a sense of peace, of closure, and of victory. The house was mine, and with it, the chance to finally rebuild my life. And as I looked at Eleanor, I knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter for both of us, a chapter where we would face the future together, stronger and more resilient than ever.